Hey, this is Jeff Johnston back with my first solo podcast. This is segment number 2, which is the intersection of health, wealth, and purpose and how important it is in mental wellness. This is coming off the heels of my first segment, which is called The Road to Resilience, where I talked about the why behind what I do, where my passion comes from. I like to say purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. And then the last segment, which will be next after this one, so you don't want to miss this because I think this will be the most important, authentic conversation I'm going to have yet about an important word, and that is faith, and what faith means to me and how it's really formed and framed what I do every day. So thank you very much for listening to this second segment. And with that, here we go. When I was looking at mental health, okay, so I set the table at the last conversation about our son, Seth, who passed away from fentanyl poisoning, and then my wife, Prudence, who succumbed to grief through alcohol and prescription pills, that I kind of was thrust into the mental health space, not by choice. I was selling investments and kind of building a very comfortable life. And at age 50 is when Seth died, and then Prudence died at 55. So at about 55, 56, I was kind of thrown into this area of what I call mental health, kind of the clinical side. Like, what happens when you get into the hamster wheel in the United States? You know, what's the expectations? What's the outcome? Are they good? Are they bad? And why are so many people struggling? I mean, do we just keep double downing and coming up with more labels, more prescriptions, more treatment facilities? Or do we find a brand new way to look at mental health as mental wellness, like brushing our teeth? And that was what was in front of me. That was in my head, that was spinning around when I was on the Living Undeterred tour around the United States in the summer of 2022. I was thinking to myself, there's got to be a better way. You know, there's a lot of culpability in Seth's and Prudence's death. I'm sure I'm to blame to some of it. Doctors, the medical profession, prescription pills, the school systems, alcohol, drugs, you know, where does it end? You just keep pointing fingers. And then finally I said, enough's enough. There's got to be a solution. There's got to be, as I like to say, another arrow in the quiver. There's got to be another way through this. That's the problem. We're going around it. And so the idea of building a mental wellness platform, an app of all things, at my age, when I didn't have a ton of tech, you know, I don't have a lot of technology background, but I know a lot of people that do. And sometimes the greatest ideas aren't built by the person who has the idea, built by the team. And so I set off on this unbelievable, grateful opportunity to build Brightn. And you may ask, that's a cool name, Jeff. Where's it come from? And I just realized I neglected to talk about that the first episode, so let me talk about it now. When Seth died, October 4th, 2016, at the age of 23, 3 weeks later, his beautiful baby daughter was born. She's now 8, and she is a gift, an honest gift. And her name is Brightn, spelled differently than the way we spell it, but that's all I have to say. I mean, it's people ask me what my why is, and I always kind of smile. It's like, yeah, there's something really beautiful about this story that we, and I say we because everybody that follows, everyone that subscribes to this channel, everybody that buys my book, everyone that downloads the app, it's a we story. This is not a me narrative. There's something more powerful behind all this, more than just each individual contribution. So that's the genesis behind the Brightn initiative, or the Brightn app, was I wanted to leave a legacy to not just honor Seth and Prudence, but to encourage and empower those that are in the middle of fighting for a better lived experience, to improve human flourishing, which is really what this is all about. So when I set off to build the app, I was thinking to myself, well, I did investments for 32 years and now I'm in mental health. Geez, there's those are probably the two farthest areas you could find to find a common ground, you know, to find a tether or a bridge. But the reality was, it really wasn't as hard as I was initially thinking it was going to be. And so I remember sitting at a campground in Little Rock, Arkansas with my son, Roman. We were on the Living Undeterred US tour in that big RV that I bought and drove around the country, and talking to Roman about what's next. And he says, Dad, you really believe in harm reduction for people that are struggling with drugs and alcohol. In other words, making sure they have safe syringes, they have safe places to do the drugs, they have fentanyl test strips, they have Narcan available. We encourage drinking, and we say, hey, don't drive drunk, have someone drive sober for you. Well, we don't do that with drugs. We just say, go in a hotel room and stick a needle in your arm, and hopefully no one finds out. And I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. And so as a harm reductionist, which is just simply, I want to give everyone a chance to live to tomorrow. That's the core concept behind harm reduction. It's not pro-drugs, it's pro-life, trying to keep people alive. Was, how do I build something to take my background of 32 years of doing financial planning and introduce the world to this idea called empowered mental wellness planning? In other words, financial planning involves gathering facts, making a recommendation to where to invest your money. So if a client came in my office and they gave me their 401k to invest, I would do a financial plan. I would get to know them, ask them questions, and then I would put together a recommended portfolio. And a lot of times that would be stocks, bonds, and real estate. And I've been out of the business for about 5 years. Now I would say cryptocurrency, and you have other asset classes now, maybe gold and silver. The point of the story is, as my grandma used to say when I was coming into the business, Jeff, make sure people don't put their eggs in one basket. And that's kind of the point of the story. It's called diversification. And in investing, diversification, like I said, stocks, bonds, real estate, et cetera. And I thought to myself, okay, let me look at the mental health space. The first thing I did in between when Seth and Prudence died was I became an advocate, not an activist. There's a massive difference between the two. I wanted to be an advocate. And the first thing to be an advocate is you have to learn. You have to understand the space that you're in. So I watched podcasts, I read books, I physically went to conferences around the country. I went to webinars, I befriended people, I asked questions, I became a sponge. It's like, I can't help people unless I understand what the issues are in the first place that are causing these people to do what they do, okay? And I didn't want to just build a telehealth app and just introduce your kids to the same system that my son and wife were introduced to. Like I said, there had to be something better. And so I thought to myself, if we build the first mental wellness planning app, what would my human asset classes be? Okay. So you have your investment asset classes. What would the human asset classes be? In other words, what would I diversify in the human experience to lessen the probability of suffering and pain and trauma? Not to eliminate it. I don't want to become a cyborg. I think there's value to suffering and pain. As Viktor Frankl said in Man's Search for Meaning, suffering will be my opportunity. That's what he said. So I thought to myself, if we can reduce the amount of human suffering, that's what I want to do. After some time and a lot of reflection, I came up with this. My human asset classes are health, wealth, and purpose. If I could build an app to optimize the intersection of health, wealth, and purpose, I think we'd have a fighting chance to increase human flourishing in this world. And that's what we did with Brightn. That's what I set out to do 2 years ago, and that's what we have built today. And so I want to talk a little bit about each one of those as I talk about in the second segment about the idea behind this intersection of health, wealth, and purpose. So if you look at statistically, we'll start with the first one, and that's health. About 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. That's a high number. And I think if you look at old age health problems, the majority of them could have been delayed or prevented through better choices of food intake, what you drink, what you eat, things that you put in your body, things you're exposed to, chemicals, sun, things like that. Again, a lot of these things are free and in abundance. You don't have to buy a cold plunge, to improve your health. I think the choices you make every single day are so underutilized. And I use this example with my kids. You're at the store, There's the cooler there. You've got water. You've got maybe flavored water. You've got a Diet Coke and you've got a Coke. 4 choices, right? Well, obviously you know the bad one. It's the Coca-Cola. And water is a little blah. I'm not a huge water fan. I'm not gonna be honest with you. So you've got 2 other choices. You got Diet Coke and now you have maybe a lemon twist or some type of a lightly flavored water. Okay. Well, I think either one of those choices is going to be better than the Coke. And if you did that 20 times a day, you pick the water. I'm not suggesting, for me, it would be the water with the lemon in it, but that's an example of just a little tiny choice magnified over time. You could save yourself thousands and thousands and thousands of calories a week, even a day, just by a simple choice on one thing like that. Then you go and you look at, do you do beef? And if you do beef, you take in the leanest beef, or do you do turkey, ground turkey? You may think these are just, do you do organic or non-organic vegetables and stuff? It's like, do you wash your fruit before you eat it? These sound stupid, but again, these aren't things you have to pay thousands of dollars for. These are little tiny choices you can make in your life that add up over time. So the health part became big for me, but the majority of apps and startups in the space, they were pretty simple. They were either all health-based, so they were meditation, breath work, eating healthy, low sugar, sleep patterns, things like that. And that was the primary goal, was focus on just health. And I thought, yeah, that's important, but there's got to be other areas that we could start to introduce to work on maximizing human flourishing. And so health became the first pillar in the Brightn development of the app and also in this movement that we're creating. And so, yeah, I think things like breath work are important. Meditation is very important. I meditate every day. Sometimes it's multiple times a day. I do breath work, not as much as I probably should, but in times of anxiety, when I feel like I'm getting anxious, if I have to go pitch Brightn to a group of investors, or I'm going to do a public speaking event, a lot of times I'll just close my eyes and I'll just, in my mind, I think about Seth and Prudence, and I just breathe and I just think about all they went through and the struggle they went through. And what I'm about to go through just is laughable in comparison to what they went through. And so for me, it kind of balances me. It recalibrates me into being grateful for just having the opportunity to be anxious, to having the opportunity to be scared and afraid. And they don't have that because they're not here. So again, these things, instead of pathologizing them as abnormal and giving people labels and pills, we need to start looking at these things as superpowers for us. Having anxiety, fear, and worry, you couldn't give me a pill to get rid of those. I think it's one of the reasons why I do what I do, is that I can feel these and lean into them. So health became really important to me as a core tenet on the app. And so the second one was something while I was doing my research, and initially we started off, the Brightn experience was for Gen Z, which is 14 to 26, which is young adults. That was primarily our lane when we first launched. We've now pivoted to, we have more adults on the app today than we do young adults, which is interesting. But we're in the employee benefit space now, so that's really kind of changed our numbers a little bit. But I was looking at the second core tenet. I thought to myself, well, let me look at the statistics of what, like Gen Z, for example, what's some of their problems. And I came across a statistic that said Gen Z was the most lost, anxious, depressed generation in human history. Now you have to remember, or you have to be aware, Gen Z is the largest generation in human history. 2.56 billion humans on the planet are considered between 14 and 26. And they're the most lost, anxious, and depressed generation ever. And ironically, they have more abundance than any generation, especially American youth. How is it they have more and they're feeling less? I think some of it was just coming down to things like meaning and purpose. And so that's the second core philosophy or tenet or pillar on the Brightn experience. We have health, and now we had meaning and purpose. So if I could build the app and reward people that are working on their mental wellness, not mental health, again, that's too clinical, how would I bring in a sense of meaning and purpose? Well, in my opinion, the best way to instill or install meaning and purpose is to be in service of others. I think that's it. When you do good for other people, there's no pill there's nothing that can make you feel better than that pure altruism, that pure feeling of, yeah, I helped, even if it's a little animal or somebody you don't know. And we miss that today in society. We're so divisive. We're so angry. We're so opinionated. We're so polarized. We're so captured in identity, like I'm MAGA or I'm woke, and it's like there's no middle ground anymore. You either or you aren't. You're pro-life or you're pro-choice. You're religious or you're an atheist. And it's like it's unhealthy. Meaning and purpose is a huge part of my therapy, my well-being in my life. Has a lot to do with me giving back and really not expecting anything in return. You do that enough that the universe will pay you back. I don't mean that financially. For those of you that's your objective, then good luck. I don't think that's authentic, and I don't think that's going to last very long. But if you're doing it with well intentions, the universe will find a way to help you get there. And again, I'm going to really talk about this in my third segment on faith. I'm really excited to talk about that because it's a big part of my life, and it's shockingly, surprisingly different than what you think. I'll tell you that right now. How I define faith is completely different than what a lot of you think I define it as. So meaning and purpose became a really core tenet on the app, and we've done it through some really innovative ways. We've found ways to gamify the app, and I hate that term, but we've taken advantage of the benefits of serotonin and dopamine hits. Obviously, those can be very detrimental, especially with addictions like gambling or pornography, but it also can be used as an ally. Just like most things in life, there's a balance there. Fentanyl, for example, can be used to kill you like it did my son or kept my dad alive when he was in the hospital. To me, meaning and purpose became a very important part of my personal life and also how we built the app. We want to teach a generation or show a generation or guide them that when you work on your mental wellness, you can earn points, and then you can cash those points in to do good, like planting a tree, cleaning the coral reefs, feeding the homeless, rescuing a pet that's stuck in some shelter. I don't know of any drug out there, any hack, any cold plunge, any quick, get fixed quick thing that's going to help you any better than just being a nice human being. And how much does that cost? Doesn't cost anything. So that's the second pillar of what we've done with the Brightn experience. We have health and we have meaning and purpose. And so the third one was huge for me. And why three, right? Well, I kept thinking of a triangle. And for our old logo up there on the board, you see we've got the three triangles, and that represents the three tenets of our app. Now, we've now since changed the logo, but I kept it up there as a reminder of why we came up with this whole idea of the intersection. So we have health and we have purpose. What was the third one? Well, I got to thinking, there's something missing when I went to all these. I remember going to a LinkedIn webinar. One of my good friends, who's an advocate in the suicide space, her son took his own life, unfortunately, as many have. And I went to this webinar, and there was like 200 people. And I just sat patiently listening about all these reasons why there's all this suicide and all this despair and social media and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like to myself, no one yet has talked about the one thing that's been sitting in my mind for a while. And that's a dysfunctional relationship with money. That's a big reason why people unravel. And Forbes magazine came out with a quote, I think it was back when I was first doing my research on the app, the number one stressor for older Gen Z, so 18 to 26 years old, was financial insecurity. It wasn't anything else. It was money. Not having it or not having it, but the inability to understand how it works, the mechanics behind money, the emotions, the qualitative aspects of money. That was the number one stressor, but nobody was talking about it. Nobody was talking about it. And unfortunately or fortunately, however fate designed it, that was my strength. That was what I did for 32 years was, the wealth management aspect. And so the three tenets now were revealed to me: health, purpose, and wealth. And so this intersection of health, wealth, and purpose to me became the core aspect. And another statistic that really was glaring to me was that 77% of American adults couldn't get their hands on $1,000 by the end of the day unless they borrowed it from somebody. In other words, almost 80% of American adults live paycheck to paycheck. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not here to tell you the reasons, but I'm just here to give you the data. And that's a problem, because if schools are teaching the math and the quantitative aspects of money and the numbers, and mom and dad are fighting about money, and most of your friends' mom and dads are getting divorced, and all these problems are happening in marriages driven by money, that's a problem. But no one talked about it in the mental health space because money isn't clinical. You can't find a label for money like depression, anxiety, or bipolar or manic. None of that involves money, but it does. A lot of these things can be manifested or be exacerbated by your unhealthy relationship with money. So that was it. That was the idea behind the Brightn app, the intersection of health, wealth, and purpose. And I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to kind of talk about that off the heels of the first segment, which was the road to resilience. So now we have the intersection of health, wealth, and purpose. So now that's 2 of the 3 segments. And the next one is the thing that ties it all together. I was going to say most important, but obviously the first one's the most important. The thing, the glue that ties it all together is the next one, and that's faith. And so thank you very much for listening to the second segment of the Living Under podcast for my solo podcast. And I look forward to sharing the secrets of my faith next.